Chapter 43. Boats. Under different circumstances, mastering the controls of a 30-metre, 20,000 horsepower catamaran might have been fun. But Dana was shattered, and her foot was agony. She'd lost a lot of blood, and as she sat in the captain's chair watching the radar screen, she had to keep pinching herself to stay conscious. Barry was in a bad way, still out cold. Nina came around, hurled some abuse, and fought her ropes for a while, but Dana wasn't in a sympathetic mood and aimed Barry's gun at her. "Unless you want a hole in your head to match the one you put in my foot, I'd suggest you shut up." "You've betrayed the survivors, devil." Dana smiled. "You're no more of a survivor than I am." The sea was pitch dark, so all Dana could do was watch the radar screen and the GPS as the Cat blasted through the water towards a liaison with an Australian Coast Guard vessel. It was a huge relief when she saw its searchlight flash across the twin bows. She cut the turbines and left the tricky business of coming alongside to the experts. A Coast Guard officer pulled off a hair-raising stunt, leaping over the side of his ship and dropping several metres onto the slippery deck of the low-slung catamaran. Once he was aboard, Dana watched him scramble to his feet and secure a rope between the two vessels. After a trial run with a container of medical supplies, 2 more officers hooked themselves to a pulley and slid along the rope onto the deck of the catamaran. As 2 male officers took down the rope, a woman headed up to the bridge. She was taken aback by the amount of blood smeared over the decking. "Oh, sweetheart," the woman gushed as she saw Dana slumped in the captain's chair, hardly able to keep her head up. "How do you feel?" "Faint," Dana said weakly. "I didn't take my shoe off in case it made the bleeding worse." "That's good," the woman nodded. "I'm Dr. Goshen. I'll get one of the lads to carry you down to the mess, then I'll take a proper look at you where there's a bit more room." The larger of the 2 male officers scooped Dana into his arms and took her on an unsteady trip downstairs, laying her out on one of the sofas at the back of the mess. He smiled as he put her down. "You're a heavy old lump." Dana struggled to smile back. "I do triathlons. It's all muscle." "I can believe that," the officer nodded. "He's a heck of a size, that fella you tackled up there." "What about the dinghy?" Dana said. "Did you find Eve?" The man shook his head. "They're rubber and plastic, virtually impossible to pick up on radar, even when the sea's as calm as it is tonight. I doubt she'll last more than a couple of hours out there with an open hull. One big wave will flood her out. Even if she makes it to Indonesia, they've anchored the tankers a couple of kilometres offshore and vented off the gas in the jetty." "That's good," Dana said, sniffing involuntarily as she imagined Eve ploughing through the sea, desperately bailing out her tiny boat. The Coast Guard officer looked anxiously at his colleague, as if to say, "I didn't mean to make her cry." "Try not to worry. We're doing all we can to find her." Dana waved her hand in front of her face. "It's not your fault," she sniffed. My foot really hurts, and I'm tired, and Eve isn't really a bad person, you know. She's only 15. It was just the lot she got in with." As Dana said this, the lightheadedness suddenly overcame her. She heard one of the Coast Guard officers shouting for the doctor. Then everything went black. James looked at the row of flickering lights and Ernie's desert boot on the bottom rung of the ladder. He stared down at his clothes. His shorts and trainers were soaked in brown water, and there was a humongous cockroach crawling up his arm. He gasped, unable to curse, unable to think, angrier than he'd ever been in his life before. "There's a light switch!" he spluttered finally. As he looked around, he realised that the switch also powered a fan that was venting off the fumes. He also made a final discovery that made him totally insane. A gantry. If James had gone left instead of right when he'd stepped off the ladder, he'd have found the metal gantry stretching over the sewage from one ledge to the other. You wouldn't have wanted to eat your dinner off it, but it beat wading through filth by about 1,000,000,000%. "Oh, this better be a dream," James groaned. Ernie hopped from the ladder onto the gantry without so much as getting his boot wet. "James," he gasped, "what in the blazes are you doing down there? Look at the state of you." Lauren's head popped down through the hatch, and James thought he saw a tiny grin. He pointed at her. "Don't you dare laugh." Lauren screwed up her face in horror. "Is that toilet paper stuck on your leg?" Ernie walked along the gantry and grabbed a ladder that hung horizontally from 2 hooks on the wall. "I don't know what kind of welcome we can expect when we get out there," he said gravely. James realised he had to forget his personal embarrassment and focus on the mission. "Lauren," he shouted, "my radio's knackered. Get yours out and try telling Chloe what's going on. We don't want tag units shooting when they see us." "Gotcha," Lauren nodded. She squatted down in the damp passageway and pulled off her trainer. Meanwhile, in the tank, Ernie was using the top of the ladder to push the hatch open. "Chloe, do you copy me?" Lauren shouted. Chloe came back in her ear. "Loud and clear, Lauren." "We're about to head out via the sewage tank. We're between the 4th and 5th turrets. Can you make sure nobody starts shooting at us?" Chloe sounded elated. "You're getting out? Thank God. I think you'll be okay. The tag teams are all over the other side by the airport, and as far as we can tell, the survivors have abandoned the turrets." "Makes sense," Lauren nodded. "Everyone's been ordered to get into the strong rooms beneath the Holy Church. But you've got to tell the soldiers not to come steaming in here. The whole joint has been wired up with explosives." "Got that," Chloe said. "I tell you what, head out of the Ark and run for at least a few 100 meters, just in case someone tries to take a pot shot from inside. I'll drive over to meet you in my car. I should be there to pick up in a few minutes." "We've got company," Lauren said. "There's 9 of us all together." "9?" Chloe gasped, pausing briefly before realising that there would be time for explanations when her agents were out of danger. "Right, I'm on it." Lauren tucked the radio in her shorts and looked across at Rat. "You go. I'll start passing down the little ones." At the other end of the tank, the hatch was open and the ladder was in place. Ernie held his gun out to James. "You go first. Take this to cover yourself." "Okay, boss," James said, as he hooked the gun over his shoulder and stepped onto the ladder. He was shitting himself as he poked his head out above ground. But it was a relief seeing the running track and the outer wall of the Ark behind him. "Looks good, mate," James said as he clambered out. He crawled for the first 30 metres before breaking into a sprint over the baked ground. Joseph and Ed had both now realised that they were leaving the Ark, but Ernie was around, and the small boys instinctively trusted him because he was an adult. The 2 little lads made their own way down the ladder and pinched their noses theatrically as they ran across the gantry. When they reached the other side, Ernie lifted them up all but the last couple of rungs and told them to run in a straight line until they met James on the outside. Once the boys were out, Lauren lowered the 3 sleepy toddlers down to Ernie. He ran each one across the gantry before handing them up to Rat, who leaned into the outer hatch and grabbed them on the other side. By the time everyone met up, Chloe was approaching in her car, and a big Toyota 4x4 driven by a tag officer ran close behind. James had stripped to his boxers and used the dry part of his t-shirt to wipe away the worst of the filth stuck to his skin. While he slumped on the ground feeling sorry for himself, Lauren and Ernie tried to calm down the overwrought toddlers. Joseph and Ed couldn't understand what had just happened and stood in stunned silence. Rat stood a few paces from the others and shuddered with excitement as he looked back at the 3 glowing spires. "I'm never going back," he promised himself quietly, as he grabbed the leather strap from around his neck and gave it an almighty tug. It felt beautiful, watching the beads slide off and bounce on the hard ground. Then the ark exploded.